ikhanda lami ngomqhele wobulungisa nenhlafuno yami ngemvunulo yobuqotho wena ngeqiniso wena ngeqiniso
Welcome everyone to the Pupil of the Eye. I think Mandisa, our host tonight, will share a little bit about what that means exactly. But I just wanted to share a little bit about Mandisa. We're very lucky to have her with us this evening, all the way from the UK, where she lives with a beautiful family, 3 beautiful children. Some of you in South Africa may already know who Mandisa is. Mandisa used to be a TV presenter here in South Africa. And then she also established something quite special called Shine Your Light. Is that right, Mandisa? You're a little bit of a light yourself, I think, just looking at that gorgeous smile.
Oh, thank you, Haley.
So I think maybe you could tell us just a little bit about what Shine Your Light is and some of the wonderful work you're doing. So we're really happy to have you here with us. So welcome, and over to you.
Thank you so much. That was a lovely introduction, and hello, everybody. Yes, I started Shine Your Light, which was initially supposed to be just a YouTube channel 4 years ago. And I was basically just producing little short video inserts with the kids and I, just practicing a virtue every week. We would choose one and we would do something related to that virtue. And we did that for a good year. And then I kind of took a break, wondering where it was all going. And recently I kind of became more active on social media again. And I thought to myself, what impact can I make just sitting at home, especially with lockdown? What can I do just here in the comfort of my home? And making videos again was something that really resonated with me. And also reaching out in a much more practical sense. So I'm a primary school teacher. And I thought to merge my television experience with my, very short education experience. I haven't been a teacher for very long. And to merge the two and be of service. And that's when I decided then to look into the Baha'i writings and the Baha'i materials for that. And I found that the Junior Youth Spiritual Empowerment Program was the best way to do this. And so I launched Shine Your Light as a as a vehicle for this, and to reach out to junior youth all over the world, and to offer these junior youth empowerment workshops on Zoom, or any other medium. I'm not getting any commission, shouldn't be advertising. And, you know, just to give them an opportunity to tap into this powerful empowerment program. So it starts off with the junior youth, and I'm looking to expand that reach into to more older people as well, and parents, and kind of expanding the power of the Baha'i writings, and how they can help all of us to shine our lights. So without further ado, I will get started with today's presentation. And I'd like to say thank you very much, actually, to the hosts for putting their trust in me. They have no idea what I'm going to be talking about. So here goes. Hang on, I need to press screen share. I haven't done that. Let me escape here. Try that again. Share my screen. Right. Man, I gave away my, it's like putting the punchline before the joke starts. That slide wasn't supposed to be the beginning one. Okay, let's start the slideshow. Okay, so today's presentation is about inspirational people of African descent. And it's going to have, you know, 3 parts to it. I'm basically going to be going right back into pre-colonial Black Africa, very briefly. I'm not a scholar, so this is purely based on, you know, the little understanding that I have of it. And then I'm going to be talking about representation in terms of the media, and what the education systems around the world are trying to do, and unfortunately falling short of doing. And then finally, I'm going to touch very briefly on some notable figures in the Baha'i Faith as well. So I was watching Sister Act 2 a few days ago, and I remember Amal being just so enthusiastic about his African heritage, being an African American. There was this kind of renewal and revival, especially in the 90s. It kind of went in waves. And in the 90s, there was that kind of hip hop generation who was trying to be in touch with their roots again, and find their heritage. And this character really stood out for me because he could quote and tell everybody in his classroom about the people that inspired him from his heritage. And he would have had to go out of his way to find that information out for himself, because this wasn't the syllabus. It wasn't taught in his school. So he was a young man who owned that and tried to educate himself. So I'm going to be touching a little bit briefly, and I didn't realize just how far back we have information. I always thought of African history being lost, and largely kind of being lost along the way because of imperialism and so on. But it actually turns out there's still a lot of information that can still be had and told about. The British Museum, for instance, holds many, many artifacts from pre-colonial Africa, specifically from pre-colonial sub-Saharan Africa. So there's the ancient period, there's the post-classical, and then there's the modern period. So I'm going to be touching more on the modern, kind of more 1500s to the 1800s, very shortly, just before the first contact with the Europeans was made. So when you look, if you were to Google pre-colonial sub-Saharan Africa, a whole list is going to pop up, a very extensive list of kingdoms and empires dating way back from the time that I just showed you, and expanding all over the continent. So I've only just chosen 2, which is just literally a drop in the ocean of all the information you could possibly find if you were to look into this. So I'm just gonna, move this along. Before the Ashanti Kingdom had contact with Europeans, it had a flourishing trade with other African states due to the Ashanti gold wealth. Now, this is the region around Ghana. before it was known as Ghana, and it was obviously divided up very differently. Trade with European states began after contact with the Portuguese in the 15th century AD, when the gold mines in the Sahel started to play out. The Ashanti Kingdom rose to prominence as the major player in the gold trade. At the height of the Ashanti Kingdom, the Ashanti people became wealthy through the trading of gold mined from their territory. When I was at school, I don't know about everyone else here, but we did not learn anything about other African countries. We literally, I mean, I grew up in South Africa. Our syllabus basically started with Jan van Riebeck, and then went a little bit forward. And this is way before the history books were changed. So the kids today, I know, are learning a little bit more than we did. So I'm probably the last generation of that kind of, or that level of education. And I was led to believe, without directly being told, but the take-home message that I walked away was that gold mining only happened after Europeans came to Africa. And basically the wealth of Africa was discovered by Europeans, unbeknownst to the African indigenous people. So I left school with this notion. Nobody said this to me explicitly, but that was the feeling that I had. And I can only imagine what other people were thinking at the time, because had you not gone out of your way to find this information out, you would not have known. On May 15, 1817, the Englishman Thomas Bowdish entered Kumasi. This is now in the Ashanti region. He remained there for several months, was impressed, and on his return to England, wrote a book. He said, Mission from Cape Coast to Castle. So that was the name of the book, and he was very impressed with this. He praised the kingdom, but was disbelieved, as it contradicted the prevailing prejudices of the time. They needed the rest of Europe to believe that Africa was backward. Africa had no idea about anything other than their very simple hunter-gatherer or, herding lifestyles. And there was basically nothing to see. Look away, folks. So a lot of the British, or in fact Portuguese as well, explorers who visited Africa had many accounts and wrote books, drew pictures and sketches of the architecture and everything that they found and the artifacts that were used at the time, and it was completely dismissed. It was also very important for me to not just look at the rosy side of things and just try to cherry pick the things that I wanted to hear about pre-colonial Africa. So slavery was historically a tradition in the Ashanti Empire, with slaves typically taken as captives from enemies in warfare. The welfare of their slaves varied, so some of them could go on to marry and acquire property and so on. And they could also take grievances to the authorities if they were mistreated and so on. So there were laws in place for those slaves, but nonetheless, they were still captives. The next one I'm going to look at very briefly is the Great Zimbabwe. And the majority of scholars here believe that it was built by members of the Gokomera culture, who were the ancestors of the modern Shona people in Zimbabwe. The Great Zimbabwe era was settled by the 4th century AD. Between that time and the 7th centuries, these cultures farmed the valley and mined and also worked with iron. There are many archaeological findings that were dug up at that time, as just the one that you're looking at right there is quite impressive. And it also gave the archaeologists a lot of proof about the trade that was going on at the time. They found Chinese pottery shards, coins from Arabia, glass beads, and other non-local items that were all excavated at the site, which proved that there were some very good trade links happening as far as China. Another important thing here was that they estimate that 20 million ounces of gold were extracted from the ground at this place, which really leads a person to ask a lot of questions about the decline of these empires and where did all the wealth go? And all sorts of questions come to mind that Whether or not they're answered at all is probably not the most important thing. But for me to know that there were these empires who had very civilized ways of working and had justice systems and different forms of governance was, for me, the most important thing to find out and to know about my heritage as well. Why wasn't I taught this at school? So as you'll gather, that's little me at some random age. Yeah, that's on my mom's fridge. Don't know how old I was there. Definitely a primary school photo. So I read up that the South African government now wants to make a lot of changes to this. So they're proposing that by 2023, history should be made mandatory for all high school students. So at some point, maybe I think it's grade 10. So everyone chooses their subjects and then specializes from there on. So they're thinking that this might be a really good way to get people thinking critically and talking, and it might actually help with cohesion and take away some of those preconceived ideas that I held as a child. And like, can you imagine just that sense of pride that one would have that is, for me, a prerequisite to equality, because I can't really feel equal until I know of my own greatness. So a little bit of research was conducted by Natasha Robinson of Oxford University. So she was a fly on the wall and she sat in on a few classrooms in Cape Town. She chose a cross-section of society, very, different socioeconomic backgrounds, different kinds of schools. And she sat in on some history lessons to see what is the link that students are making between their South Africa's apartheid past and how we perceive things to be today. And she found that for the most part, students aren't angry about the past because they don't see the past as having a particular impact on their present lives. The question, though, is whether they are capable of dealing with educational, social, and political problems if they view these problems as ahistorical. Is there a link between what people see around them and what happened in the past? She believes that that link is not actually being made. Now, she actually quotes one of the students saying, well, things are definitely changing because my mom, who's a domestic worker, is treated really well by her employers, which would not have been the case many years ago. So, to this little girl in the classroom, this was a sign of progress. And, that's arguable. And of course, progress is measured in different ways and has many, many layers to it. But she worries that that important link has not been made. This is not just a South African thing. Governments all over the world are trying to, sorry, just one moment. I'm just going to mute myself while my neighbors are passing.
While they're passing, would you like me to read it? The flexibility within the history curriculum means that there is the opportunity for teachers to teach about BAME history across a spectrum of themes and eras.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So this is in response to a petition that was put up. And every time a petition gets 100,000 signatures, it has to be looked at in Parliament. So, and I remember signing this petition on Facebook. It was so exciting because it called upon everybody to say, right, we need an overhaul in the education system in the UK because children are not being taught about the effects of imperialism and the slave trade and everything. They're seeing it very much as this Oxford University researcher said, is that they're seeing it as history and that's it. We can close the chapter on it. We don't even have to look at it again. So this was something that needed reviewing, and this was the response of the British government. And it's very, very recent, like literally 2 days ago, this response was published online. So I was so excited to see it and to be able to share it here on this presentation, because it showed that, yes, there is flexibility in the history curriculum. I agree with this. However, you need a teacher to be informed before they can incorporate that into their lesson in the first place. Now, in the UK, you don't need a history qualification to teach history. So teachers will study primary school education, which is a very general qualification, and they're able to teach all the subjects. So the same story with South Africa is wanting to make it compulsory so that older children can learn all these very important things. Are they going to make sure that teachers have this understanding of the links between imperialism and the current and modern day? And also, when they do go into high school, will they then be helped to make those connections with critical thinking? So there is this model with representation. I think this is one of the things that we struggle with as well, because children leave school, they've got their education, and they're out in the big wide world. And one of the things that struck me was, I think I was probably in my late teens, and I was flicking through the channels, and I saw that there was a category called Black movies. And it just boggled my mind. I thought, okay, so every other movie is called a movie, and movies with Black people are called Black movies. I didn't quite understand it very much. So in terms of representation, are people of color and people of ethnic minorities being represented fairly in terms of are they just being represented as criminals, for instance, or as corner shop owners? Or, what is the extent of that representation when they are being represented? And does society inform the media, or does media inform society? And I looked into this a little bit more, and I quite like the theory that Stuart Hall poses, where he talks about the circular model of representation and influence, where you have the media, mirroring society, and society then influencing what the media puts out as well. So it's a twofold process, because I did wonder if I should be blaming the media for all the lack of representation that's going on. But actually, when I think about how we're being educated at our schools, when we leave school, are we then doing what we need to do when we are people who are key players in industry and influential places? Are we doing our part in making sure that Black people of African descent are being represented fairly, and so on? So as a media person, for instance, I need to be aware of this as well, and see what part I can play. So one of the nice things about having social media and having kind of this global reach and being able to read articles from all over the world, I stumbled upon this article recently about Ntombizodwa Mahlangu, who, with the support and encouragement from her family, was able to graduate when less than 10 years before that was a domestic worker. And she now has a degree in public administration, and she's just climbing and going onwards and upwards despite everything, despite the odds, despite the fact that the education system doesn't quite help us, despite our socioeconomic hindrances. She still, against all those odds, persevered and reached the heights that she did, which is really leading me nicely into the actual inspirational people of African descent. I don't need to introduce these awesome humans. I think everybody in this room knows exactly who they are. I don't need to even name them. But to me, the most important thing was to acknowledge them, and also to kind of zoom in a little bit more on a few more of the lesser known people as well. So these are the people who are a little bit more, they're in the academic fields, who might not be as widely known and published. There's a man called Otis Boykin, who can be credited for the pacemaker. Dr. Shirley Jackson, fiber optic cables and all our awesome Wi-Fi connections and internet connections. She's the lady to thank for that, with her amazing scientific mind. Philip Emeagwali, he's a scientist who developed the fastest computer. And Lewis Latimer, who is credited for developing the carbon filament that can be found in light bulbs. So without that, we would not have even had Thomas Edison's invention would not have been complete without Lewis Latimer's contribution. This brings me really nicely to, in fact, I'm going to go back a little bit and freeze there. So for me, I was, kind of thinking about the link in all of this. Like, is it enough for to show, for instance, somebody who has a very narrow-minded view of the contribution of people of African descent, is it enough to show that kind of person these people's accomplishments and say, see, look, people of African descent are making great strides? And not just that, but despite their backgrounds, in spite of their hindrances and obstacles that they have been placed in their way due to systemic racism as well. But there had to be another hurdle to climb over. There was another layer to eliminating racial prejudice, and of course, that is changing hearts. You can't change hearts with just a bunch of scientific facts and figures. You can kind of, reason with a person, but that's not necessarily going to change the fact that they either love a group of people or don't. Which is why I looked into the Baha'i Faith itself, and it wasn't until, I'd say 10 years ago that I really looked into the people of African descent that have made huge contributions within the Baha'i Faith. So that was a very important link for me to make, not only as a Baha'i, as a Black woman, but also to be able to reach out and teach other people about it as well, because it's equally important to share it. A very recent letter from the Universal House of Justice, where they are the governing, or rather the body that oversees the affairs of the entire Baha'i world, and they write letters periodically to the Baha'is of the world. And the most recent letter that they wrote to America in light of the recent events, I won't go into it too much, just a little segment that I found on there just literally yesterday when I was reading through it, was the fact that it spoke about how racism is a moral issue, and it's such a deviation from human nature. And it's something that we can't only focus on the socio-economic stumbling blocks that are standing between people uniting, but we also need to reach hearts. That is how we truly unite and change people, which is why I looked into these awesome people in the Baha'i Faith. And the first person that I would like to talk about is a remarkable man called Louis Gregory. He was born on June 6, 1874. You can just imagine, what is the backdrop here? We're talking about, African American, like his parents would have been slaves. That is the time frame that we're looking at. So it's not long after emancipation. We're looking at a backdrop of Black people being lynched. So this is the time that Louis Gregory was born in. Louis Gregory attended the first public school that was open to both African Americans and whites in South Carolina. There being no law schools that would accept him in the South, he continued on to Howard University in Washington, D.C. to study law and received his LLB degree in spring 1902. Gregory attended a lecture by Lua Getzinger, a leading Baha'i, in 1907, and that's how he really got to know and fall in love with the Baha'i faith. So on July 23rd, 1909, he declared as a Baha'i. And in 1910, Gregory stopped working as a lawyer and began a long period of service where he dedicated all his time to teaching the faith and spreading the unifying message of Baha'u'llah. And on March 25th, 1911, he met Abdul Baha, who's the oldest son of the founder of the Baha'i Faith. And Abdul Baha had started to then travel to the West at that period in time. He attended a reception by the Persian Charge d'Affaires and the Turkish ambassador. So the reason why this is put in bold on this part is Abdul Baha rearranged the place names on the at the table to put Gregory right next to him. This is a time when there were no integrated meetings. So this really made quite a statement and would have made such waves and stirred so much interest and maybe a little bit of turmoil as well among the people that had attended at the time. On September 27, 1912, Gregory and Louisa Matthew married, becoming the first Baha'i interracial couple. And as you can imagine, they would not have been able to travel together in most places because, of course, intermarrying would have been illegal at that time. Gregory continued to travel and give talks about the Baha'i faith, promoting race amity. He died aged 77 on July 30th, 1951. On his death, Shoghi Effendi, who was then the guardian of the Baha'i faith, so after Abdul Baha passed away, he then handed over the guardianship of the Baha'i faith to Shoghi Effendi. He cabled the American community, and please use your grammar mind and add in all the things that have been left out. I'm going to read it slowly. Here goes. Profoundly deplore grievous loss of dearly beloved, noble-minded, golden-hearted Louis Gregory, pride and example to the Negro adherents of the faith. Keenly feel loss of one so loved, admired, and trusted by Abdul Baha. Deserves rank of first hand of the cause of his race. Rising Baha'i generation in African continent will glory in his memory and emulate his example. Advise, hold memorial gatherings in temple in token recognition of his unique position, outstanding services. Now, the Hands of the Cause were a group of people that then were charged with overseeing the affairs of the faith, especially after Shoghi Effendi's passing. So this was a really high and revered honor to have been given. Which then brings me to my last person of note, Enoch Olinga. He was born on June 24th, 1926. He became a Baha'i in 1951. He responded enthusiastically to the call to teach and pioneer to places where the Baha'i faith had not yet reached. And he hadn't been a Baha'i for very long, just a few months, when he just like, yeah, I'll go, I'll do it. In 1953, he pioneered to the British Cameroon, which was what it was called at the time. And a significant number of people became Baha'is because of his teaching. And the news reached and inspired the rest of the Baha'i world. In recognition of his teaching successes in Cameroon, he was invited by Shoghi Effendi to make a pilgrimage to Israel and to visit the holy shrines as well. And in 1957, he was the first Black African Baha'i to have made this journey. Shortly thereafter, in October of 1957, the Guardian informed the Baha'i world that he had appointed Olinga as a hand of the cause of God, one of a cadre of his special deputies with responsibilities for the propagation and protection of the Baha'i religion. This assured him an honored place in the international Baha'i community. At the age of 31, he was the youngest of these people. And on the right-hand side, there is a picture of the Baha'i temple in Kampala, Uganda, which is the first African temple. And more temples are actually being built at the moment, which is really exciting news for Baha'is all over the continent. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you very much.